Okay, so let's start with a super quick revision of the next chapter, that is TDS and TCS. Yes, two sections. TDS is covered under section number 51 of the CGST Act. TCS is covered under section number 52 of the CGST Act 2017. What does the concept of TDS and TCS says? TDS says that whenever there is a supplier, okay, if there is a supplier who is supplying some taxable goods or services, okay, if he is supplying any taxable goods or services to some notified recipients, then in that case, when the recipient is making the payment back to the supplier, from that payment it is required to deduct some TDS and deposit it to the government. Okay, so whenever some notified recipient is making the payment to the suppliers, at that time they are required to deduct TDS under section number 51. That is the basic concept of this TDS. Now, this TDS which was deducted by the notified recipient, okay, then they will have to pay it to the government, okay, and the supplier whose TDS was deducted, that person will get the credit in its electronic cash ledger. Are you clear with this? Okay. If you want, I can just show the working to you. Now, let's say here, can you see here on the board, there is a person called as, I'll keep on highlighting. There is a person called as supplier, then there is a person called as recipient. These recipients are some notified recipients which we will study. Supplier will provide taxable goods or services to the recipient for which payment will be done by the recipient. When the recipient does the payment, from that it is required to deduct the TDS and pay it to the government. Right, and the supplier whose money was deducted, this amount, let's say 2 rupees of TDS was deducted, so this amount will be credited to the electronic cash ledger of the supplier, which it can use for discharging its liabilities. Okay, similarly we are later going to study the concept of TCS. Let's do it one by one. First of all, TDS section number 51. Now, first of all, who all will come under the purview of this TDS? Okay, this is TDS under GST. Who all will come under the purview of GST? So, when the recipient of taxable goods or services, or when the deductor, can we say the person who is going to make the payment to the supplier, that person is going to deduct, right? Who all are these deductors who can deduct the TDS? So, it can be a central government or a state government department or establishment. Okay, in that, one of the ministries is Ministry of Defense also. So, some authorities under Ministry of Defense are coming under TDS purview. Some authorities under Ministry of Defense are not coming under that particular purview. Anyway, otherwise, all central government departments and establishment, local authorities, government agencies, and some notified persons. Okay, ma'am, what do you mean by these notified persons? Any authority, any board or any body which is either set up under an act of parliament or state legislature, or which is having at least 51% control or participation by the government. Okay, so such authority, board, body will also be liable to deduct the TDS. Similarly, any society which is established by central government, state government, local authority under Society Registration Act 1860, or any other public sector undertakings. Okay, public sector undertakings are also coming under that notified persons, and therefore, if all the other conditions also get fulfilled, even they will be liable to deduct the TDS. Okay, but two exceptions here where TDS is not at all required to be deducted. One is where goods or services are provided by one PSU to another PSU, irrespective of the fact whether they are distinct persons or not, doesn't matter. Okay, when the goods or services are provided by one PSU to another PSU, or whatever notified persons we studied above, or whatever persons, whatever type of recipients that we studied above, if they have provided goods or services to each other, example, a PSU has provided to a society has provided to a local authority, etc. आपस में अगर उन्होंने एक दूसरे को goods या services if they have provided, then in that case also TDS provisions are not at all applicable. Okay, apart from that, if the supplier has provided goods or services to these persons, to these recipients, and if the contract value, okay, not individual supply value, if the entire contract value of such taxable goods and services, if that exceeds, if that is more than rupees 2,50,000, okay, excluding GST, contract value excluding GST and cess, if that exceeds rupees 2,50,000, then in such a case, we at least know that TDS provisions have become applicable. Okay, supplier providing taxable goods or services to those category of persons, and if the contract value between these two persons excluding GST and cess, if it exceeds rupees 2,50,000, then in that case TDS becomes applicable. Okay, ma'am, what is the rate of TDS that is applicable? In case of intrastate supply, 1% CGST, 1% SGST, that is total 2% is the rate of TDS, and if it is an interstate supply, then normal 2% IGST TCS rate will be applicable. Okay, so ultimately we can conclude that rate of TDS under section 51 is equal to 2%. Are you clear with this? Okay, one more exception which is coming up here. Now they say that one more case where no TDS is required to be deducted even if the above pointers are fulfilled. Okay, now let's say if the supplier is situated in Maharashtra, in our state. Okay, supplier is situated in our state and the place of supply is also in Maharashtra. Okay, but the location of the recipient is in, for example, Delhi. Okay, supplier Maharashtra, place of supply Maharashtra, recipient is in Delhi. Then can we say if the place of supply is in Maharashtra, then I am going to consider it as an intrastate supply only. So I will be charging CGST and SGST in my bill, right? This invoice is going to go to that Delhi person. He is normally, let's say contract value exceeded 2,50,000. He is required to deduct the TDS at the rate of 2%. But how will he deduct the TDS of at the rate of 2%? It is 1 and 1%. Can we say 1% of CGST and 1% of he will deduct maybe of Delhi SGST or Maharashtra SGST. So can we say I will not be able to get a credit of the same? He cannot pay, the Delhi person cannot pay 1% TCS in the Maharashtra SGST account. He will pay 1% TDS under Delhi SGST. But if he pays under Delhi SGST, I will not be able to take the credit because I am sitting here in Maharashtra. So this becomes a very big problem. Therefore, they say that in this complicated provision, let's not put the provisions of TDS. Therefore, when supplier and the place of supply is in one state, okay, but the recipient is located in some other state, then in such a case TDS provisions are not applicable. Are you clear with this? In all the other cases TDS provisions will be applicable. Are you clear with this? Yes. Okay, then whenever we calculated this contract value, okay, contract value, if it exceeds 2,50,000, then TDS provisions will be applicable. And when you are calculating this contract value, it is going to be excluding GST and excluding the cess element. Okay, then if all these conditions are fulfilled, then TDS is required to be deducted. TDS will be deducted at the rate of 2%, and that has to be deposited with the government by 10th of the next month. Okay, before 10th of the next month, it should be deposited with the government. Okay, then as soon as that person deposits it with the government, then that deductor, okay, just like your income tax, that deductor is required to issue a TDS certificate to the deductee in form GSTR 7A, which will contain all the details about the TDS deductions that has been done. Now, that deductor who has deducted my 2% TDS, can we say that person is required to pay that amount of TDS to the government? If he does some delay in paying that amount of TDS to the government, then interest will be applicable. And as soon as that particular person makes the payment of TDS to the government, after that an option will be given to the supplier to avail the credit of such TDS in its electronic cash ledger. Are you clear with this? Yes. Okay, then after that, the person who is deducting my TDS, that person is required to take a separate registration for the purpose of deducting the TDS. That person will apply for registration on the GST common portal and will be given the registration within a time period of 3 working days. Are you clear with this? This was all about your TDS provisions under section number 51. Okay. Now, TDS provision. First of all, supplier can be any particular person. He should be making supply of taxable goods or services only. Exempt is not allowed. Okay, means if exempt goods or services are provided, then there is no TDS provisions applicable on it. Okay, so if I am supplying you, you are the recipient, I am providing any taxable goods or services, and you are that recipient, government, central government, state government, department, establishment, government agencies, PSUs, local authority, notified persons, then when you are making the payment to me, provided the contract value exceeds rupees 2,50,000 excluding GST and cess, then you are required to deduct my TDS at the rate of 2% and pay it to the government within a time period of 10 days from the end of the month, right? And one special case where TDS was not applicable, when the supplier, okay, and the place of supply is in one state and the recipient is located in some other state, then in such a case TDS provisions were not applicable. Are you clear till here? Yes, this was your TDS provisions. Now, similarly, let's go to the next TCS provisions. Okay, collection of tax at source. Now, collection of tax at source is also related to your e-commerce operator, section number 9(5) of CGST and section number 5(5) of the IGST, which we have already taken up in the earlier chapters, right? So, e-commerce operator concept we had studied, where we had taken multiple examples of Ola, Uber, Rapido, Zomato, Swiggy, Make My Trip. Remember all these examples that we had taken earlier? Yes, so if there is a supplier, okay, if there is a supplier who is supplying any goods or services, okay, or I should say who is supplying taxable goods or services to the customer through an e-commerce operator, this is mandatory. Okay, when the goods or services are provided to a customer through an e-commerce operator, and the e-commerce operator who is there in between is collecting the payment from the customer. Okay, normally when we order food from Zomato, we make the payment to Zomato and then Zomato further shares it with the restaurant, right? So if this is the way in which the transaction is being done, then this section number 52 has put a responsibility on the e-commerce operator, okay, on the e-commerce operator to collect tax, TCS, to collect tax at the time of making the payment to the supplier. Can I say buyer? The customer would have made the payment to the platform, to the e-commerce operator. Now, e-commerce operator will further pass on this money to the supplier. When it is further passing on the money to the supplier, from that it will have to collect some amount of TCS and pay it to the government. Are you clear with this? Okay, now this is applicable for taxable goods or services which is provided through an e-commerce operator. Now, on what value and what is the rate of TCS, etc. applicable, let's try to understand that. Now, TCS will be applicable at the rate of 1%. Okay, in case of intrastate supply, it is 0.5% plus 0.5% coming to aggregate 1%. And in case of IGST, that is in case of interstate supply of goods and services, it is going to be 1%. Okay, so TDS was 2% rate, TCS is 1%. Okay, now, in TDS, first for applicability, we had to check if the contract value is exceeding 2,50,000. If yes, then every time when the recipient is going to make the payment to the supplier, at that time it was required to deduct TDS at the rate of 2% every time. Now, similarly, here also in case of TCS, when the eco is making the payment to the supplier, okay, then 1% TCS will be collected on the net value. Okay, on the net value, I'll highlight it for your quick reference. 1% TCS will be applicable on net value of goods or services supplied. Okay, means can we say sometimes there can be returns also, goods return also. We order goods from Amazon, etc. and if we don't like, we return it within the next 7 days, 10 days, etc. So whatever is the net value of goods or services supplied through eco, okay, means after returns, after sale returns and excluding your GST and cess, okay, on that particular amount, your TCS will be applicable at the rate of 1%. Are you understanding? Let's say the value of goods supplied through e-commerce operator is equal to 1180 including GST. Then TCS will be applicable on 1000 rupees, that is excluding your GST. Okay, again, eco is required to collect this tax from the supplier and means from the payment that will be done to the supplier and pay it to the government. Are you clear with this? Yes, two exceptions where TCS provisions are not applicable. First of all, when notified services as studied under section number 9.5 or section number 5.5. When those notified services are provided through e-commerce operator, at that time, do you recollect ECO was liable to pay the tax? ECO was liable to pay the tax on that supply of goods or services. In that case, TCS provisions are not at all applicable. Okay, so the provisions that we had studied in the earlier chapter, Zomato, Swiggy, or Ola, Uber, and all those things, those were coming under your notified services. If those notified services are provided through ECO, then TCS provisions were not applicable. Okay, but if there is any other supply, okay, if there is any other supply of goods, or if there is any other supply of services other than notified services, okay, example, I am providing coaching services through an e-commerce operator that was not covered in that list. So in that case, TCS provision will, now in the case of this coaching services, TCS provision will be applicable. Okay, let's say I am selling this AC remote through Amazon, Flipkart, etc. Then this is normal supply of taxable goods. On this provision, TCS, on this particular product, TCS provisions will be applicable. Okay, but provided the supplier has sold it through e-commerce operator and e-commerce operator has collected the payment from the buyer. Okay, if these two provisions are fulfilled, then TCS provisions shall become applicable. Then after that, suppose if the supplier is selling the products from his own website, then in such a case TCS provisions are not at all applicable. Why? Because TCS provisions will become applicable only when there is a ECO in between. So if I am providing some goods or services from my own website, then TCS provisions are not applicable. Are you clear with this? So till here, okay, one very important exception that we have studied is if any notified services as studied under section 9.5. See, I have given you the reference also, transportation of passenger, accommodation service, housekeeping service, etc. If these notified services were provided through e-commerce operator, TCS provisions inapplicable. Basically, if 9.5 is applicable, then section 52 is not applicable. Okay, if 9.5 is not applicable, then in that case, section 52 shall become applicable. Are you understanding this? Okay, what is the rate of TCS? Rate of TCS is 1%. Okay, 0.5 plus 0.5. Now, what if there are multiple ECOs in between? Okay, there is a buyer who is buying the goods through one particular ECO. Okay, then this ECO is integrated with some other ECO, and that person is ultimately having the agreement with the supplier. What if there are two ECOs in between? If there are two ECOs in between, who will be responsible for collecting the TCS? Then that particular ECO will be responsible for collecting the TCS, who is ultimately passing the money to the supplier, who is ultimately making the payment to the supplier. That person will be liable for the TCS provisions. Are you clear with this? Okay, then one more amendment that we had seen in the composition provisions, that if any particular person, if there is a composition taxpayer, okay, if there is a composition taxpayer who is earlier a composition taxpayer was not allowed to provide goods or services through ECO, but then they cut the word goods from there, means a composition taxpayer can still supply goods through an ECO. If a composition taxpayer is supplying goods through an ECO, then in that case, TCS provisions will now become applicable. Okay, still a composition taxpayer cannot provide services through an ECO, so TCS provisions will not be applicable there. Okay, then this 1% rate of TCS will be applicable on what? It was applicable on the net value. It was applicable on the net value of the taxable supplies. That is, after considering all the returns and excluding the GST taxes as well as the cess. Are you clear with this? Okay, yes. And one more thing. TCS is not applicable in case of reverse charge mechanism. TCS will not be applicable in case of import of goods or services transaction, because there anyway custom provisions shall apply. Okay, then when this ECO was making the payment to the supplier, at that time it collected the TCS. At the time of collecting the TCS, it is required to deposit the TDS to the government before 10th of the next month. Okay, once it deposits the TCS with the government, after that it is required to file a monthly statement in form GSTR 8 on the common portal, in which it will put, it is just like your TDS return kind of a thing, in a TCS return kind of a thing, in which it is going to put all the details about why was TCS collected, on what amount TCS was collected, how much is the TCS applicable, and all those things. So the due date for filing GSTR 8, that is this monthly statement, is also going to be 10th of the next month only. Means immediately after making the payment of that TCS to the government, payment of TCS plus filing of this GSTR 8, both should be completed by 10th of the next month. Are you clear with this? Then as soon as the eco files GSTR 8, this information will also be available to the registered suppliers, okay, whose TCS was collected, so that now they will come to know that their TCS has been deposited with the government, and now they can avail the credit of that TCS and can credit it to their electronic cash ledger. Are you clear with this? Okay, then after filing this monthly statement, once the year gets over, they are also required to file an annual statement in form GSTR 9B, which is to be filed by 31st December of the next year, which will again contain all the details about the TCS throughout the year. Okay, then the persons who were required to collect the TCS, they are required to get themselves registered as a tax collector. They will have to apply for registration on the GST portal. They will be granted the registration within a time period of 3 working days, and later if they feel that they are not at all liable to collect the TCS or deduct the TDS, then they can apply for cancellation of their registration. Are you clear with this? Yes. Then after that, next important point is in which month, okay, in which month TCS provisions become applicable. Now, there can be a possibility that supply is made in 1 month, but we are able to, supply means supply which was done through the eco. Okay, let's say it was done on last day of the month, but the payment was collected from the buyer. Okay, the payment was collected from the customer in the next month. Maybe it was a COD delivery or COD order, etc. Then too, they still say that TCS provisions will not get postponed. TCS provisions will become applicable in the same month in which the supply was done. Okay, if the supply was done in the last month, then in the last month itself that TCS provisions of paying it to the government will become applicable. Okay, then there is a power which has been given to authority who is at least of the rank of deputy commissioner of GST. Okay, any officer not below the rank of, or any commissioner not below the rank of deputy commissioner, that person can ask report. Okay, it can issue a notice to the e-commerce operator, and it can ask the e-commerce operator to submit the information about what amount of goods or services was provided through you, or what is the value of stock kept in your warehouse, etc. And if this particular authority asks the questions, or if it issues a notice on the eco is required to reply to that within a time period of 15 working days, and if not done, okay, if not done, then in that case it will be liable for a penalty up to rupees 25,000. Very clear with this? And yes, the eco, when it is paying the amount of TCS to the government, okay, it has to be paid in cash. It cannot use its input tax credit and pay that amount of TCS to the government, because once we pay the TCS to the government, correspondingly the supplier is going to get the credit of the same in its electronic cash ledger. So we will have to pay the TCS in cash, then only it will be reflected in the supplier's electronic cash ledger. Are you clear with this? Okay, then with the new concept being introduced, this was your amendment with new clarification which has come up here. That is, now you must have heard about this ONDC concept which has been introduced by the government. It is not a platform, but it is a network where multiple buyers are going to meet multiple sellers. Okay, intermediaries will be eradicated. This is what they are planning. So ultimately the customers are going to get the goods at reasonable prices online. Okay, so this ONDC concept was introduced. Now in this ONDC also, in between there can be multiple ecos. Okay, for technical purposes there can be multiple ecos in between. As you can see here from the diagram, this is the first issue. Let's say there is a buyer who wants to buy, so he goes to an app. Okay, let's say Paytm is offering the option of ONDC purchases there. So the buyer goes to the website of or to the app of Paytm. Okay, so your Paytm is called as the buyer side e-commerce operator. Now similarly, there will be a supplier who is willing to supply his product through a particular e-commerce operator. So now here between buyer and supplier there are two e-commerce operators. So first question arised was, is TCS provision applicable in case of ONDC also? It was anyway applicable in case of platforms, Amazon, Flipkart, etc. Is it applicable in case of network also, ONDC network? So answer is yes, it is applicable. Here, who is going to ultimately make the payment to whom? Buyer will make it to buyer side eco, buyer side eco will make it to supplier side eco, supplier side eco is ultimately going to make the payment to the supplier. So this person, that is the supplier side eco, will be liable for the purpose of collecting the TCS and paying it to the government. Okay, similarly, let's say there is a buyer, okay, who is going on the Paytm app and using the ONDC services and placing the order from the supplier. Then in that case, can we say buyer will make the payment to the buyer side eco? We will make the payment to the Paytm. Paytm will ultimately deduct its nominal charges and pay it to the supplier. So in that case, at this particular point of time, TCS provision shall become applicable. Are you understanding till here? Yes, this was one clarification. This was one clarification which was recently issued after this ONDC concept was introduced, and one important amendment in section number 9.5. Okay, in section number 9.5, just now we discussed about those notified services. That is, if notified services like food restaurant services, then your transportation of passenger, Ola Uber services have been provided through e-commerce operator. Okay, Shiv Sagar providing food services to the customer through Zomato, Swiggy, etc. Then in that case, their eco was liable to pay the taxes. If eco was liable to pay the taxes under section 9.5, then section 52 was inapplicable. TCS provisions was not applicable. Related to that list of notified services, there was an amendment. In that point, do you recollect Ola Uber point? Yes, the statement was what? The statement was services by way of transportation of passengers. Services by way of transportation of passengers by radio taxi, motor cab, maxi cab, motorcycle or any other vehicle except omnibus. Okay, now what amendment they did here? This was the original statement, this one. The one which is highlighted in yellow. Okay, this was the original statement. From the original statement, what they did was they have cut the word omnibus. What does that mean initially? Primarily, it means that if transportation of passenger service has been provided by omnibus, then it is not a notified service. Okay, if it is not a notified service, now can we say TCS will become applicable on that? Okay, that was put up here. Okay, then what they did was they introduced one more point in section number 9.5. Okay, they introduced one more point in section number 9.5, one more line item where they said that services by way of transportation of passengers by an omnibus except where the person supplying such service through eco is a company. Means what? Okay, let's break it in two parts. First part is this. Okay, first part is this. Services by way of transportation of passengers by an omnibus. This they have put in section number 9.5. Means even this is considered as a notified service only. Okay. But what is not considered as a notified service? When the person supplying such service, that omnibus person supplying such service through e-commerce operator, if it is a company, means the ultimate supplier who is supplying this passenger transportation services through omnibus, if that supplier is a company, then it is not a notified service. Okay, means example, let's say there is a supplier. Okay, let's say there is a supplier who is supplying services to the customers. Okay, to the customers through e-commerce operator of transportation of passengers through omnibus. It is a notified service. Okay, but if this supplier is a company, okay, if this supplier is a company, then it is not a notified service. Means can we say 9.5 is not applicable to this person? If 9.5 is not applicable, then can we say in such case section number 52 will become applicable? Okay, so omnibus can be divided into, services by omnibus can be divided into two parts. Okay, what are the two parts in which it can be divided? First one, if the supplier is a company. Second one, if supplier is not a company. If supplier is not a company, normally section 9.5 applicable, therefore 52 inapplicable. But if omnibus service supplier is a company, then in that case 9.5 is not applicable. Okay, and if 9.5 is not applicable, then we can say that section 52, then we can say that section number 52 becomes applicable. Are you understanding this? Yes, this was an important amendment in section number 95 also, as well as in section number 52 also. Are you clear till here? Done.